Hey, what's up? Welcome to Read About Knives. I know you're into knives because otherwise you wouldn't be here, and we got a pretty special show tonight. This is kind of oriented towards the holidays. I think you all are going to enjoy it. Do you remember? I was watching some movies the other day, and the typical traditional movie with a big family meal, it'd be Christmas or Easter or Hanukkah or New Year's. Mom would always come in. She'd have the table set with her finest linen and the best china and the fancy silver. I would make this beautiful big turkey that was just picture book turkey, or a ham, or a big roast beef, and it would come in on a big platter, and he'd set it down at the end of the table, and Dad would have the honors of carving the turkey. And it was a wonderful, wonderful tradition. It was cool because from a knife perspective, somebody would be looking in the drawer, looking in the hutch, and they would pull out the family carving set, the family carving knife. And it was neat because back then, the family carving set was a pretty interesting thing to have. It had tradition tied into it. It was always something a little bit more outside the ordinary. It wasn't what you used on an everyday basis. These are kind of unusual to find nowadays because they use such beautiful stag on some of these. If you look at this piece of stag, it is incredibly nice. And then there's the hacks like me that would go out and buy these things at a yard sale or a thrift store, and they take it home, and then they cut the blade off it, and they would take the pommel piece off, and they would use that because, man, this is going to make a really cool knife. They'd make a nice looking knife out of it, and the family tradition carving set disappeared. So it's unusual to find them. Well, I've got a carving set here that, yeah, it's pretty unusual. I've had it for a number of years, and I've always very much liked it. If you remember, Grandpa would take or Dad would take, and he'd have the knife, and he would sit there and using the sharpener and do the traditional, which would just raise a burr on the edge because these were usually relatively sharp, and he'd raise a burr, and that would really help to cut the meat. And it was a neat idea. This is a set that was made by John Primble out of Sheffield, England. And it's a beautiful set. It's probably the late 1800s, probably early 1900s, possibly up until the 1920s. It was a really beautiful set because it has silver for a cap on the butt. It has silver up by the guard, which is a filigreed silver, so it was pretty most likely cast. The blade that went to an integral. It was a really beautiful, neat set. I'm going to swing the camera down, and we're going to take a look at this and see what I can go into a little bit more detail because you're going to get to see it. Okay, now we've swung down. You can see these pretty well. Here's the sharpening rod. There's a bit of a texture to it, but you notice the detail in the guard area. You notice the detail on the cap, which is pretty cool too because the caps fit well. Here's the traditional blade. These blades were made out of like 1095. They were a very ordinary carbon steel blade, but they would take a good edge. They didn't necessarily have good edge retention, but that's why you had the stropping rod to do that anyway. And you can barely see it underneath. I doubt we can pick this up in there, but it says John Primble, goods of quality, trademark. Yeah, goods of quality, trademark. These are neat old sets. This one's getting a little bit of crack in the stag. It's getting older. Okay, but the coolest part of these carving sets was actually the fork. The fork was a neat part of this. And for years, I'd seen this fork and never really understood what this part was about. I've had people tell me that that's for when you go to pick up the meat, and that would hold the meat on there, which never really made sense to me. Until I had an old grandma come in one day, and she saw the set, and we were looking at it, and I asked her about it, and she looked at me like I was crazy to not know the difference. And then she told me, she goes, when I set my table, it was my finest china, it was the silver that we polished, and it was on my finest linen tablecloth. And then you would cut the meat, and when you'd pick it up with the fork, you had meat juices on it, and the fat, and the grease that was on there. And if you set that down on my table, you would stain my linen tablecloth, and I'd spend the next day or two trying to get the stains off. So the good ones came with this little stand that you would pull up and set it down on the stand when you weren't using it, and it would keep the steel parts off the tablecloth. Really pretty cool. You know, these things were things that got handled through the heritage. And with the holidays coming up, I'm going to suggest that maybe you want to look at some of the traditions and maybe bring back the tradition of carving it instead of using the electric meat hacksaw, to slice it up in the kitchen and just bring a plate full of the sliced up meat. I think we're going to try to do it at my house this year. That pretty much covers these knives. I think they're very interesting. Those of you who haven't been here before, I want you to make sure that you subscribe. It'd be a great present for me. Subscribe and like and hit that little bell for the alerts to know when we're coming up with new material. There's a lot of knives here that we're going to be talking about. I'll put some up here so you can see them. Okay, there'll be a lot of knives that we'll be talking about. Those of you, when you join us, if you'd like to, definitely in the comments, make a comment. Let me know what kind of knives you'd like me to be talking about, because this is your show as much as it is mine, and I want to make sure that we stay interesting and ready to go. So remember, like, subscribe, hit the alert bell, make a comment, let me know. From my family to your family, hope you have wonderful holidays. Make sure they're memorable. One of Reed's rules for the holidays is you have my specific permission to eat too much. You can start dieting on the 1st of January. That's when your diet can start. Anything else is fair game. If it goes on the table, you can eat it, except for that horrible green bean casserole crap that nobody likes anyway. So, thanks for coming by. We'll see you next time around.